I strongly believe that we're given what we need before we know we need it, if that makes sense, or like prayers are answered before they're asked or they need to be asked. I had honestly been preparing for this my whole life without realizing.
Hello, and welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. This podcast is about exploring the grief that occurs at different times in our lives in which we have had major changes and transitions that literally shake us to the core and make us experience grief. I created this podcast for people to feel a little less hopeless and alone in their own grief process as they hear the stories of others who have had similar journeys. I'm Kendra Rinaldi, your host. Now, let's dive right into today's episode. Well, hello. Today I have my friend SaraMae Hollandsworth on the line. SaraMae, are you here? Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you for having me.
I am so excited you're on this podcast. I've been waiting and like so excitedly to be able to share your story ever since we met. Oh my gosh, I think it's been almost 4 years ago that we met
Oh,
at an
wow.
airport in Las
Yeah,
Vegas. Yeah.
yes, we did.
So is it okay? Do you remember that day?
I
Do
very
you
much
remember that?
remember that day. Yeah. And then we shared a taxi to the hotel.
We shared a taxi or Uber or whatever,
Uber,
Lyft,
probably. Yeah.
what, yeah. But I want to actually, if it's okay with you, I want to say the premise of how it is I met you and why it is I needed to share your story,
Of
if
course.
that's okay. So I remember we were on the same plane. We're going to the same conference, and I knew you were going to the same conference because you were wearing a backpack from our companies, our
Uh-huh.
health health and wellness company that we're both a part of, and so I got off of the airplane and saw you at the baggage claim and started chatting with you. I'm like, oh, how long have you been using the products? Da, 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 da. And in the conversation, you suddenly said something that made me jump back like 2 feet because you said, oh, well, after I lost my legs, and I remember just jumping, like, what? And doing that second kind of like that comic look of the back and forth,
Yeah,
like that,
I
that I
remember
didn't
that.
realize that I didn't realize I had been talking to you for all this time, not knowing, not realizing that you didn't have your limbs.
Yep.
And then on your end, what were you probably were not used to that. You're probably thinking people are coming to you already noticing that. Is that usually what happens?
It's funny, it's honestly split down the middle. Like half the people come and I can usually kind of tell by their demeanor and they want to ask about it. And then I know that the other half you can just tell have no clue. And then I do like what I did with you and then it's a similar thing. It's so fun.
I love it. Well, thank you. And I know that it's a tough topic we're talking about, but at the same time, something that I think will bring a lot of hope and inspiration to a lot of the listeners because something that struck me when I met you was in that Uber, Lyft, taxi driver again, one of the one of the vehicles I don't remember
Yeah.
that which one of all the means of transportation it was that we shared to the hotel. You said the following words, and it was, "This didn't happen to me; it happened for me."
Hmm.
And that was, and I know we cried the entire ride to the hotel in our conversation, talking about all these different aspects of grief and things that I was even going through in that moment too, with my mom being
Yeah.
diagnosed with cancer. And it was just amazing how inspiring you were. So let's begin from the kind of beginning. Let's
Okay.
begin with how long ago it was that you lost do you like to say limbs, legs? What is the correct
Um,
terminology?
Honestly, it doesn't matter. I usually say feet because I'm like, I have most of my legs. So in my brain, when I
Okay.
say legs, it feels like I'm claiming more of a loss than I have. So I usually just say feet.
Okay. Great. So take us back to that and how it happened.
Yeah, and just to give you guys a tiny bit of background, so you kind of understand the full picture. I'm a lifelong personal trainer, wellness coach, and athlete myself. That's what I've done. And at the time, I was in school getting my degree in kinesiology and sports psychology. I was running my own boot camp business. I was preparing myself for a half marathon, and I was also a couple days out from a fitness competition. And I felt off for starters. And then I just had some nagging pain in kind of my hip and low back. And I knew I hadn't injured myself. I was pretty in tune with my body, but I also knew something wasn't right. And that just continued to escalate for the next few days to the point where, and some parts of my memory at this time are foggy and parts are crystal clear. So I'll do my best to provide the details. But it got to where I was crawling around the house from the pain. It was so bad. So I finally went in to the ER, and they thought, when I described everything, they thought that maybe I had either hurt myself or that I had sciatica. And I said, I don't think so. But they gave me morphine and ended up sending me home the same night. And then it was, I believe, like a day and a half to 2 days later, which ironically is coming up in just a few days. We call it my alive day. It'll be my 8-year anniversary, my 8th alive day. The day I was,
What date? What's the date?
it's March 24th. So it was March 24th, 2012 that this all happened. I went in first on the 22nd. They sent me home, and then I believe it was like the middle of the night on the 24th. I turned to my boyfriend at the time and I said, I think I'm dying. And so, which for me, I was a pretty tough chick. So to say that things had to be pretty bad. So they took me in, and I pretty much immediately went into full organ failure. They had to put me on life support. I had a heart attack. All my organs were failing, and so they ended up having to put me on a bunch of medications to keep me alive so that I wasn't crashing. And then, I was on life support. And that was for a couple of weeks. I was in a medically induced coma. Every time they would try to bring me out of it, I would crash. But after a couple weeks, then I kind of turned the corner, I guess you could say. And they brought me out of the coma. And it had been an interesting experience being in the coma. So I was not communicating with anybody for a while. They thought maybe I'd had some brain damage and some other stuff. I remember having to relearn to swallow, to even use my hands to do any regular functions. I had no idea what had happened. I remember some of my boot camp clients coming to visit me, and I was like, I'll see you tonight at boot camp. And they're going, when I finally was talking and having visitors, they were like, not anytime soon.
You were saying that
But
you were telling them,
yeah,
I'll see you tonight at boot camp.
yeah, I was like, go change your clothes. We have class. I mean, I just had no idea what had really happened. Not even slightly. And to give you a
Wow.
little bit of background, my body couldn't handle diagnostics, so they didn't fully know what had happened to me. They just kind of had to keep me alive. Um, After the fact, down the road, they kind of guessed that they think I had an infection in my hip. That's where it started, and it had spread to my blood, which is why I was in septic shock. That's what almost killed me. And I didn't lose my legs right away. So I was in the hospital, in ICU and other areas for 6 weeks. I ended up walking out, but like I said, I had to relearn how to do all functions, which was just, it's like I went in
That's weird.
preparing for a marathon, um, getting ready for fitness comp, and then I come out not really knowing how to use my hands and barely being able to walk. I mean,
That
um,
is just amazing.
yeah, I was probably, I don't know, 115 pounds, no body fat, super fit. My body ballooned up to like 160 pounds and had all this.
In the 6 weeks. In the
Yeah,
six
while
weeks
I was
from
in the
the
hospital, it was when my kidneys shut down. And I guess liquid was just oozing out of my pores. My body was just so swollen. And then I left the hospital. I want to say I was like 84 pounds. which, I lost 30 pounds of muscle. I looked frightening. I remember the first time I looked at myself in the mirror, I'd avoided that, but I accidentally did. And it looked like I looked like a ghost. I didn't look like a person. And that was really terrifying.
So this is 6 weeks after the, going basically into a coma. You come out of the hospital.
Yep.
This is you
Hmm.
learn again to basically, again, learn how to move your hands, swallow, the
Hmm.
basic functions.
Yep.
Speaking, you did have that
Yeah.
knowledge,
After a
the
while, I
language
didn't.
center?
Yeah, I
Uh-huh.
didn't speak to people for a while because I was terrified. My coma was a pretty terrifying time period, so I just kind of didn't trust anybody. And I mean, I'd been extremely traumatized, so it took me a while to speak, but then I could speak fine.
So you remember, bits and pieces of when you were in the coma?
Oh yeah, that part I remembered
Wow, if
well.
you're saying yeah, it is especially if you're saying that it was traumatizing. Is it
Uh-huh.
something you wanna touch upon right now, or do you wanna just go over the, aspects of the relearning? I don't wanna have to necessarily talk about something that maybe is not the right
Oh,
moment to.
it's
So,
okay. I
but
can
is
just give you
was
a
it just a yeah, a glimpse? Is
quick.
it just, because you're aware of what's going around, you're listening? The reason it's
Yeah.
interesting is because so many people end up having to be around family members that end up being in a coma and sometimes
Mhm.
are left in these situations of having to make these really big choices, right? Of whether to
Right.
keep them connected, disconnected. Sometimes they don't know, can they listen to me? Can they not? All these kind of
Right.
questions that they may have. And you had it was a 2-week period that you were in a coma,
Yeah.
and that those 2 weeks for you, that they ended up having such impact and trauma,
Yeah.
is just, something I'm just curious to know what about it was that it felt so, like, as was it like a prison, like being caught in this prison? I don't I'm just trying to visualize what it would even feel like.
Yeah. And I'll preface it to say, like, I've spoken, to other people who've been through similar types of things, and I often hear that theirs was maybe a better experience. So I don't think that
Mhm,
the nature of what I experienced is necessarily like, super common or what
mm,
everyone's experiencing, but the element of I was very aware of what was going on, to the point where there was a room that I was never conscious in that I was able to describe what it looked like and where how it was set up and things, which is really interesting. Like I knew where.
got chills. I just got chills.
Yeah, right. I mean that
Well, I
gave
got
me
chills.
chills when I realized that.
I
I was
got
like,
chills.
yeah. So
And
that,
still right now, I'm not kidding, Sarah, because Sarah May, I'm
yeah.
like having to right now,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
like my face is all it's like goosebumps on
Mhm.
my face. Um, the idea
Yeah.
of that aspect that we can see without eyes, kind of, yeah, that's
Mhm.
in my perspective at least, and I know and I've said this in the other interviews that I've had. The people that will share stories and listen to stories here in this podcast will have very different
Mhm.
spiritual backgrounds and beliefs, and
Right.
so but I am always curious to hearing everybody's story. So so that was what is going on. You
Oh, for
can
sure.
describe it to a T of what was this room when
To a
there was no
T.
consciousness. Wow.
Yep. I knew, like, I knew the energy that was going on. I knew when people, because it's trauma, it's chaos for everyone involved. So friends, family members arguing, different stuff like that I was aware of. The traumatic part of it is I was experiencing my own death and murder, which just sounds so
Mm,
intense, but that's what I was experiencing pretty much on a loop for those 2 weeks and being tortured. Like because obviously I'm aware and I also am in this, altered state or place or whatever it is. But when they were, like, for example, I think they would turn me so that they could clean the beds and make sure that I wouldn't get bed sores and things like that. And I mean, I thought I was being tortured during those moments. So, and like you mentioned, was it like a prison? There was one of the things was that I was being tied down, reoccurring and held down, and I couldn't. So all these scary things, right? And it wouldn't
mm,
end, and I couldn't cry out for help. and there was just no control over that. And it was just enduring that. And then I suddenly came out of it and was like, wow, I don't know who to trust. I don't know, and I also didn't really have the ability to communicate it with people. So no one, in all fairness, knew that that's what I was experiencing either. I was just quietly had it going on in the back of my mind, I guess.
Wow. That just totally moved me right now.
Oh,
Yeah, that is a lot.
yeah.
Because not only are you having then to come out of this relearning, but as you said, just kind of experiencing that trauma and again the regaining
Mhm.
of the trust and um, to some extent probably were there aspects of like not knowing even what was real or not? Were
Oh,
there
yeah.
those like what had really happened, what hadn't? So the trust aspect comes from that a little bit, or
Oh,
where
for
do you?
sure.
Yeah.
I just think,
Wow.
I went from what was real to that. And then I think that was the me like, see you at boot camp. That just shows, for one, obviously how much I love fitness, but also the like not fully understanding what had just transpired. Cause I
Just
just thought, I don't know why I thought I was in the hospital. I don't know that people really explained it to me. I think no one knew, no
how?
one really knew how to
How?
handle it. Yeah.
Yeah, and they
Especially,
didn't know what was going on either. The doctors didn't even
yeah.
know yet even what was happening, right.
Exactly. There was so much uncertainty. Plus, there was this element of like, oh, I want to say this correctly, but just like of all people, this can't happen to her because fitness was such, like health and fitness was just such a part of my life to
Mhm.
such an extent that I think
Disbelief,
everyone was just really impacted by
a
that.
feeling of disbelief because it
Yeah.
was yeah.
It was my own
So
my own worst nightmare.
wow. Now you come out, you said you had not lost your feet at that moment when you came
Correct.
out 6 weeks later. So
Right.
then you go home, you're are relearning all this, not even really speaking about all these emotions, plus you're also
Hmm.
dealing with all these internal things of what's going on with your body, not knowing, relearning everything. At what point did you end up going back to the hospital? What happened there with your health?
Well, they had told me because the reason that my feet came into play is when they were just trying to keep me alive, my blood pressure was tanking, like not to sustain life. They had to pump me full of so many vasopressors that keep the blood flow localized to your major organs and brain. So I lost blood flow to my hands and feet. My hands quickly recovered. My feet were compromised halfway up my leg, and the I remember a surgeon coming in saying, we need to schedule your amputation surgery. And again, I literally couldn't even understand why I was in the hospital. So having this man come in and say that, first of all, like I think it could have been, I don't know, maybe communicated a little bit more gently, but I said absolutely not. And then I do remember having some conversations with family, with the medical providers, and it was like, let's give her a chance to try and save her limbs because that's, so important to her. So I did undergo limb salvage, which I did hyperbaric treatments and different things, and had quite a bit of healing. But ultimately, it became a matter of I would have more functionality long term, having both of my feet amputated, my legs amputated below the knee, versus what I was looking at would be maybe losing part of my foot. But as far as like prosthetics and different things go, that was my best prognosis for, being an athlete and being able to move the way that I wanted versus keeping more of my body, but to have less function, if that makes sense.
So that decision came how many weeks
It
into
ended
this?
up being, well, no, it ended up being about a year, and there's multiple reasons why it took that long. Yeah, I was in a toxic relationship at the time, which I don't talk a ton about, but I knew that I needed to get out of that environment to move forward. I was living
Mhm.
in Dallas, Texas at the time, but family was back in Oregon, and I knew that it was important to get back close to family. Then there was also advocating for myself and finding, the best surgeon I could find, the best prosthetist, different things like that. And I was undergoing limb salvage. There was a lot of different factors at play. but I was in the wheelchair for that time frame,
For a
which
year.
was
For a
tough.
year,
Yeah, for a
you were
year.
wheelchair bound
Yeah,
and making those decisions, ending a
yeah,
relationship, about to move,
yep,
or making that choice to move, right?
yep,
All those things all at once. So these are all these other, like, other losses that were
yeah.
happening at the same time as your health had been one of
Mhm.
those losses. So when you then had your surgery, did you have it in Dallas? Did you have it back at where your family was on the West Coast?
Yeah, I
Where
had
did
it
your
back in the
surgery
West
happen in?
Coast. Yeah,
In
close
the
to
West
home.
Coast, you
Mhm.
had close to home so that you'd have then that support system for your recovery process?
Yeah, I honestly did not have a very very big support system, but I was really blessed that my mom is a rock star and she's a nurse. So that came in extremely
Mm,
handy, to have her support and have her in my corner during that time. I don't there's no way I could have gotten through it without her, that's for sure.
mm,
She's the
mm.
real MVP of the
That
whole thing.
Oh my gosh, wow. Oh, that is amazing. Well, just the
Yeah,
fact that you just had even just that, I mean, even one person can be an
yeah.
extreme
Oh,
support, you know?
for
It
sure.
just really has, yeah, you can have 10 million people and be alone, you know?
Right.
So, I think in these moments like this is sometimes when we notice or realize how yeah, or who is really in our corner, right? And who we
Mhm.
really have,
Yeah.
and who's really our friend, who's really
Yeah,
there completely unconditionally in these
absolutely.
kind of situations.
Mhm.
So I'm sure that that was a part of that whole process within that year and thereafter. I'm sure
Very
of
much
that.
so.
So in your after your how would you like to talk about then how it is that you transition then after then having the amputation, your life right now had put on a whole halt, right? Because you were
Oh, yeah.
a fitness instructor, so you couldn't
Yeah.
do what you were doing before if you were in a wheelchair.
Well, I
So in
did
that
for a short period of
oh
time. Yeah,
oh
I did.
well,
I should see I think I might have a photo of me in the wheelchair teaching boot camp.
never mind. Let me just go back in that. This is
Yeah.
the rock star Sarah May I know. She continued to be a rock star. No. You're amazing. You're amazing. So
So sweet.
so then you did a little bit of that then while you were wheelchair bound. Then you have the amputation. You
Mhm.
how long after the amputation did you get your prosthetics? Is it right
Oh,
away? What is that
it was
process like?
it's so funny reliving this with you. I'm like, "Oh, geez. I forgot." Well, I
Uh-oh.
didn't forget, but, um, so when I went to have my amputation surgery, I remember because when I woke up out of a coma, I remember telling them my right hip still really hurts. I think at the time, they were just like, "That's the least of your problems." I was not in a good state. So when I went to my prosthetist again, or my surgeon, um, for like an appointment before the surgery or whatever, I told him my hip is
Pre-op,
my
the
big
pre-op.
concern. I said, yeah, because for one, there's a history of addiction in my family. I've been very, intentional about being preventative in all of my healthcare and my healthy lifestyle. And I know that, a lot of people who go through something like this can become addicted to pain meds. And so the thing that I was afraid of is I was like, we're going to amputate my feet, but then this hip's an issue. I don't, we got to address the hip. So, anyways, I got them to x ray it. And that's when they said, we think that this all started there. I mean, there's not a way
Mm,
of knowing for sure. And then that's when then they referred me to an orthopedic surgeon to have my right hip replaced after the amputations, because they determined that it was basically destroyed. So I had the amputation surgery. Um, and then about 6 months later, and so I had prosthetics, but the thing is, the pain was so severe in my hip, the trying to
you couldn't use
walk.
them.
Yeah, I'd end up
Mhm.
being in the fetal position for 5 days because I wasn't willing to take the amount of medication that I would need to lessen the pain. So I just kind of was in mostly the fetal position during that time in the wheelchair with limited walking. Um, and then I had my hip replaced in two separate surgeries, essentially twice, 6 months later. And then we got to kind of
Oh,
start moving forward.
and so at 6 months after the, amputation and the prosthetics, you had your hip
Uh-huh.
replacement, and the hip replacement surgery takes about how long to recover from that?
Well, like I said, I had him twice, and
Oh,
I
so the
don't
whole okay, okay.
yeah, I don't remember exactly, but I wanna say it was around 8 weeks in between, and then it was probably about 3 to 4 months of recovery, 'cause that was pretty my hip was pretty painful. So it was a couple, I don't know, maybe like 4 months after that, then I got to really start moving.
So then we're looking into, almost 2 years
Yeah.
after your actual, um I don't I mean, the
I don't
March
even know what to
24th
call it. Yeah.
incident, yeah. Yeah, the incident,
Yeah, the original
let me just say
incident.
the original incident where you went into a coma,
Yeah.
coma. I'm like, "Coma, coma." My Spanglish comes in here,
Uh-huh.
like, sometimes it's a it's a
Coma.
coma, right? It's a
Yeah.
coma, and the comma is the other one in the grammar. Uh, so
Yes.
the,
Yep.
so it's technically almost 2 years then. So then this is when the
Yep.
work begins of the learning how to walk with your prosthetics and so
Yeah.
forth. And so here we're gonna then fast forward a little bit, but at the same time, I wanna
Okay.
know how aside from your mom being here, your rock star and keeping you, health, taking care of you with your health, how did you make sure that your mental and your
Mm.
spiritual and emotional health survived those 2 years of what you were going through? Like, what did you do to take care of yourself in that aspect and not let yourself, or unless you did let yourself in those certain moments? I'm sure you're not, invincible. You're human. But how did you come out of water in that moment? Come out of yeah,
Mhm.
being in water.
I strongly believe that we're given what we need before we know we need it, if that makes sense, or like prayers are answered before they're asked or they need to be asked. I had honestly been preparing for this my whole life without realizing. I mean, I was a kid, like 7 and 8, who would go to the library and read self-help books. And I just was obsessed. I
Mhm,
had this knowing as a young child that we can rewrite our story, that we're not stuck, like I just had the knowing, like I said, there was addiction in my background, and I never shared that with doctors because and then there was also, depression, anxiety, and other areas because I didn't want to be labeled as having that issue and then have that what's the word I'm looking for?
retell the story, like, basically
Yeah, I
become
didn't
your
want them to
story.
label
You
me
didn't
that
want
way, yeah, and then
Mhm,
treat me that way. So when
mhm,
I didn't really ever share that, and I was constantly seeking how to not have that, I realize that that takes work, like it doesn't just magically not be our story, but I really had done so much work ahead of time, um, to write a different story for myself in some of these other capacities that when this happened, it was like, okay, this is like the graduate course. This is
mhm,
just taking it to another level. And that was the greatest gift. I mean, yes, there were some like, I don't even think I have adequate words to describe the level of pain, like mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, all of it. Um, but the gift was that I had those tools, so I just went to work again. It was like, okay, what, book, what teaching, what things do I think I need to hear? And I just really kind of went on this soul journey of continuing to heal past things like generationally in my own life, and then now bringing all of this into it. And I knew, I was like, what is here for me? What's the gift in this? I had, like you said, that I had told you in the
mhm,
Uber, is I knew, I had a knowing that this didn't happen to me and it happened for me. And it's twofold. It's like I didn't feel that way, I obviously
mhm,
felt like this is hell. This is my own like worst nightmare. This feels personal. This feels cruel. But I think about myself, and I have a good heart, and I'm like, okay, I don't have, a child, but if I had created a child, I would never want to allow or do this terrible thing to them, right? So I was like, well, I just don't believe that, you know, I believe in God. I don't believe that God is cruel. So if this happened, there's, he's going to use it. And
Mhm.
I decided that, most especially when I didn't feel it. And so I experienced it that way. Again, that does not take away the fact that there was a lot of tumultuous times, tons of times, so much pain. Like, I can't, some days I look back and I'm like, I cannot believe I got through all of that. But I also just set my sights constantly on what's the gift in this? What can I learn from this? How can I grow from this? What can I share with others from this? And, I'm still walking that out. It's obviously always going to be a journey and a process, but I really focused my thoughts on that. And I knew that I needed to guard my thoughts, and I knew that I needed to be on the lookout and really, I almost didn't allow myself to relax. I allowed myself to rest, but I was on the
Mm.
lookout for my thoughts, and I really chose to, like mindfulness, to use my mind rather than let my mind use me, because the thoughts and the feelings were, all the like awful things. Um,
Mhm.
and I just knew I couldn't afford to let that get away from me. So I was just constantly, affirming myself and focusing my mind on things that I was grateful for, even when I literally didn't feel grateful for anything. Cause I remember I was like, okay, what am I grateful for? And I sat there and I'm like, oh goodness, like I'm grateful that I'm alive. And I'm like, but I don't really feel that. Like life doesn't feel like a gift right now. But I was like, but I choose it anyways, and different things like that. And then the biggest thing for me though, honestly, that was like my North Star in that is I knew, as an athlete, my heartache was going to be limited movement. That was just the most painful.
Mhm.
Plus, I was a bikini model, so I'm not going to lie. Like, I got best body in high school. There was definitely the superficial element of like, wow,
Right.
that
And
feels
you
not
used to
the
do
same.
fitness competition,
Yeah.
right? You
So
used to do fitness
yeah,
competition, so your body was part
that
of
yeah,
your
huge
of
part of my
your
identity.
your personality, right, of your
Yeah,
identity. That's the right word. Yeah,
that
so
was
then
a
suddenly
doozy.
it's, like, shifted. Yeah. But, yeah, we'll get to where that thought is now because I follow you on Instagram, and I know where that thought is now.
You're so sweet.
Um, so, all that so what you're sharing, and I'm sorry if I'm not in if I'm
No, but
just
I do need to
listening,
finish
so
the
just
thought. I just realized I almost, but go ahead.
go ahead. Put
Oh,
it, go. Finish the thought.
oh, I was just
So
gonna
you were
say,
going
because
for that.
it's so, for me, it's so important, and I think it is for all of us in our own way that it applies to us in our own personal journeys. Again, my heartbreak was in my limited movement and mobility, but I had a dear friend who had a brother-in-law, and he, I believe, was paraplegic. Um, and that stuck with me. I was like, I'm gonna get to move again, like free movement. Will it be, different? Yes. But that I could be grateful for, even when it, like, being alive didn't necessarily feel like a gift. It was like, I get to move again. I will get to move again. That will be in the future. I know. And I had really sought out at the time. I went, thank goodness for Facebook. I went to Facebook and found every amputee athlete I could find. And so that was really the image in my mind. It was just all of these incredible humans doing incredible things. And that is kind of the future that I created for myself in my mind's eye, even when it was not what I was experiencing in reality.
That is that is amazing. Everything that you're sharing is just amazing. The aspect of the gratitude, even when you didn't feel like it, of choosing to
Mm-hmm.
find something that you were grateful for that day,
Mm-hmm.
um, that is big. It's kind of like choosing to go work out, even if you don't feel
Yeah,
like it. It's like,
100%.
right?
Yep.
It's like in that moment you could feel you did not feel it. You did not
Yeah.
feel it yet. You just forced yourself to say something that you were grateful, and
Yep.
it goes again with how it is that we look into our health and the choices that we make each day, that we just sometimes have to push through those limiting thoughts and then just go through it with that
Yeah.
perspective of gratitude. And did you keep a gratitude journal prior to this happening, since you had already been doing like personal growth and development
Mm-hmm.
since you were 7 basically? Was it
Right.
something, a practice that you already had, or did gratitude kind of start happening in the moment of that, or was it something that you always practiced?
I did not. I on and off. I would. I think there's layers too, layers to our awakening, layers to our healing, all of that. This obviously took me many layers deeper. So I had the knowing of it, but I think I'd kind of taken it for granted in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, let's build this from scratch, this gratitude
Mhm.
in our spirit. But I obviously had it as a foundation in some ways because I turned to it. I just had to really dig. I had to dig deeper, honestly.
Mhm. Yeah, so that went back going back to the your faith, going back to
Mm,
your trusting in the process, trusting that you had these tools already to get you through this moment, even in those moments in which you doubted yourself.
yeah,
And again, knowing that of what I got from what you said, that this did not happen because of your creator
right.
of our God, God,
Hmm.
whatever we want to call source,
Hmm.
doing something to punish you, but more as a process for you to grow from, and a gift to some extent to continue to learn from and evolve and grow to become an inspiring light to so many people that you are now. And I want to touch a little bit on that, on
Yeah.
how now suddenly then did you shift then your life. It went from this, you relearn to walk, then
Uh-huh.
you transitioned into now being a little, you shared a little bit at the beginning, health and wellness coach and inspirational life coach as well. So share a little bit of how it is that it's now a tool for you and who you are now.
Yeah, that's kind of been the journey and the process that I've been on. There's a lot of like unbecoming, and then, that when we go through a fire or refining fires, we know it's like that which is really truly us remains while everything else falls away. So it was a lot of like figuring that out and experiencing that. And, I just came back to my roots and to who I've always created to be. And now it's like I get to, impact on a greater level doing a lot of the same things that I believe I've just always been here to do. And so, yeah, getting back to my roots, as a health and wellness coach and uh, entrepreneur, and I'm looking into actually opening my own gym down the line. That you're like one of the first people to hear that. It's funny because
Well,
I
now
forgot.
it's not just me. Then when
Yeah.
I'll have to make sure I time this for when you allow to release this podcast, when it's allowed to be heard that you're
Oh, I
about to
don't.
open it.
Yeah,
If
you
anything,
can
it's
share it.
future thinking.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
It's just been in the like this is what I know that I need to do. It's what honestly I completely forgot. But in high school, I when you graduate, I think they ask like, where do you see yourself in 5 years or whatever? I said owning a gym, and I just laugh because it's as if I forgot that. All this time going out and being an adult and doing all the things we think we should do, knowing like, well, not knowing then, but knowing now that it's like the dreams inside of us are ours, right? I believe they're gifts
Hmm.
for us. And I think for me, especially, I was often, and not at all out of people like intentionally trying to kill dreams. I just think when we're adults, we've all been through pain, heartache, disappointment, things. So often, I think if you share your dreams too soon, then people have an ability to kill them before they have the legs under them that they
Hmm.
need to really, walk through life. And so I would share stuff like that. And I think I was just always told fitness was superficial or you can't make money doing that or whatever. So, anyways, I've just come full circle and I know that, like, I call, um, the gym my church, essentially. It's like
Hmm.
it's so we walk out so many life lessons and it's multifaceted. I refer to it as spiritual fitness a lot. It's like mental, emotional, spiritual, and it is physical. So that's just really where I feel like I have the greatest growth and where I can also walk people through their own, which is essentially what I'd been doing the boot camp that I taught in Dallas, Texas. There's, obviously there's so many different ways that people like to teach and coach, but mine was really mentally driven because it's something that I've struggled with in my own life, mindset, really transcending mindset and building a more bulletproof one. So I trained them, and these, they were just average everyday people. They weren't athletes when they came in, but they did stuff that was more impressive than pro athletes because they didn't know any better.
Mm.
I didn't they never knew I was pushing them in their limits because
They didn't know
they
their
trusted me.
limitations. They didn't know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
they didn't
didn't,
know
and
their
I didn't let
limitations.
them. Yeah, I didn't let them think they had any. So I mean, they blew my mind daily. I was like, wow, I've never seen that done, but they trusted me enough to
That
go for it.
Yeah, and I think that that is actually kind of going back to being even a child, right? When we're kids,
Right.
we don't even have a concept of even fear. That's why all these dreams and things that we think of when we're kids, um, it's as if because we don't even have any concept of or doubt that they can happen, and
Right.
all of a sudden we start believing, as you were saying before, what people say around
Yep.
us, and then we start uh, kind of putting these layers and layers until we kind of hide it down deep in our soul of those dreams that we had,
Mhm.
and then they reawaken. But so then with the boot camp then that you do now you do the type of fitness you practice right now. You did boot camps before, and now you do what type of fitness?
I just actually started a year ago CrossFit, as a student because honestly, my like, a little bit of shame that I carried is that my fitness, getting my own personal fitness back took a lot longer than I could easily say than it needed to because, obviously I had to have all the tools, the know-how, all of that, but that's where all my grief was, and I couldn't face it, to be totally honest. Like, for
Mm,
me, 'cause it again, I started at such a young age to where, like, when I would teach, I did it by feel, I did it by show, it was very intuitive, um, in nature, and so nothing felt right, you know? And it was just like, that was heartbreaking. So it was
yeah,
almost like every step at the time just felt like heartbreak, and the level of trauma and grief and all of it that I had, it was like I almost couldn't handle that at the yet. And I needed the support, and I was nervous for that, even to like welcome someone into that journey. And I'd really been praying. I'd gone to the gym and done some stuff and I was decent. But I knew I was like, I want to be an athlete again. I want the eye of the tiger back. Um,
mhm.
and so I'd been praying, honestly, and then a friend of mine, Cody, awesome friend, he's like, "You need to come CrossFit," and I was freaking terrified, to be totally honest, because that wasn't even something that I'd done. I mean, I had done some movements and, but I've always been the teacher and not the student, and it just felt so vulnerable. There were just so many layers to it, but I knew that that was an answered prayer, and so I signed myself up. It probably took me a month or 2 before I would finally walk in, but I did, and it's like nothing will ever be the same. I was like a fish to water, it's so my just tossing weight
Your
around.
jam, your
Yeah,
jam,
I'm
your
like,
jam.
how it feels like I've been doing it since the womb,
And
which
and
go
it
ahead.
and the support that you're
Oh,
saying that you had in that environment, like you said,
they're
it's your church
incredible,
because at the same time you have all this support system. I've done CrossFit
incredible.
myself, and it's a community
Yeah,
effort, not
I
an
fell in
individual
love.
effort, which is and
Oh, yeah.
mm. That's awesome.
Yeah, I
And so
really fell
then
in love.
all this transformation that you regained your own confidence then
Mhm.
and love again for what your body could do
Yeah.
now. Well, and then again your confidence, all this. And so now that this has happened, and I know in along the way, you also now help coach people not only physically but also with life coaching. Is that correct?
Yep, health and life coaching. I'm super
Talk
passionate
a
about
little
it.
bit about that. Talk
Uh,
a little bit about
yeah, I
that journey.
actually just finished, 2 health coaching certifications, which was really fun. Yeah, again, it's stuff that I've been doing forever, but now it's just really putting the foundation back, all kind of putting all the tools in my toolbox that I want to really coach holistically. And as we know, it's all connected. So again, the best way that I refer to it, I don't know that everyone gets it or not, but it's spiritual fitness because it's like that. It's the mental, the emotional, the physical, both through fitness as well as how we feel our bodies, but it's also very soul driven, very, there's so we know it's like you're not overeating or you're not eating the wrong things because it's about the food. It's not about the food. It's never been about
Mm-hmm.
the food type of a thing. So
Mm-hmm.
really
Yeah.
having all of those things in place and realizing people may come to you for fitness or they may come to you for health coaching, but recognizing that you need to, or at least I wanted to have the ability to address the whole person. It's really rewarding. And I've been taking on a few private clients, but I'm looking to, or I'm in the process of creating some programs and group coaching, which I'm really excited about.
Oh, well, that's really exciting. And that's something that at the end, too, if you want to share a little bit of how people can find you on social media
Yeah.
or any of your websites, because that way they can be in the loop for when some of these things launch, as well as already seek for your services as well. So, what do you want to just say those tags now? Your Instagram,
Yeah.
which one
You
would you
can,
rather say?
I'll do both. I'm at the SaraMae, TheSaramae on Instagram, or SaraMae Hollandsworth, it'll be in the podcast on Facebook.
Perfect, perfect. And you have a website too, or right now those two are the main things?
It's under construction, but saramae.co.co.
Okay. So yeah, I'll put those in the notes here in the podcast as well, so that people can go to those links. But
Awesome.
what I wanted to just say quickly, just the aspect of you now being this spiritual coach. Do you
Mhm.
feel that uh, and not that we could go backwards in time, but if this had not happened to you, do you think that you would be able to impact people in the same way that you are doing now?
I mean, I
I know
no,
that's
I
kind
would
of
have
like a
liked
weird that's a
to do.
weird
I
question because
know
it's
it
hard,
is, but
right?
I get it. I mean, I constantly think about that. But what I know about me is, like I said, I had been attempting since I was a kid to transcend and to grow and to get to this place, and it was just something that I wasn't able to get to. But I love, I'm sure you've maybe read or studied like the shadow side of us and done some shadow work. That's just really where it's like all the stuff we don't want to feel, we don't want to look at, we don't want to acknowledge. That's really where so much magic is, which I think is really one of the greatest gifts of grief, right? It's like if we will sit with
Mhm,
it, there's so much there for us. And I was a runner, like I've been a runner my whole life, and I basically wanted to run from all of that pain, all of that stuff. And so I would do the work, but I wouldn't necessarily sit with the pain. I love that quote, the cure for the pain is the pain. It really is true. And
mm,
to be honest, it took me not being able to run temporarily, being stuck. I think that's why my journey took as long as it did. I think it needed to. Like I'm also a sprinter. That's my main
mhm,
thing. And so my spirit was like,
mhm.
let's sprint through this process. I'm gonna get it back. Let's go. I'm gonna kick ass like now. No, that didn't happen. And I think
Mhm,
that's because it
mhm,
really needed to take what it took to get me to this point. And again, I'm still growing, I'm still walking it out just like we all are in our own ways. Not to mention it's visible, and it's like we all, me not having my feet and what it looks like when I'm wearing my prosthetics and I may be kicking butt in a gym or something is just something visible of what we all have. Or flip side, you could look at it, someone could try and look at it as a handicap, which is clearly not for me. But if they did, it's
mhm,
like we all also have our own often invisible versions of that as well, right? So I think the nature in it being visible, like just today at the store, I had two different people come up to me and talk to me about it, and I always get really positive. Like people are so excited and positive about it because I carry myself that way. I feel I don't people don't ever come up to me with pity. I, glad. But I
mhm,
think that adds another element to it. And that's something that I'm really cognizant of. Even it took me a while to be comfortable. I just remember I was like, okay, I want the cosmetic coverings. How can I hide it so no one ever knows? And then when I was ready to just own it and embrace it, and I have really cool legs, um, I was very aware of how I carried my energy and how I portrayed myself, because twofold, I didn't want people to look at me with pity, or to feel sorry for me or whatever. And I knew that that had a lot to do with how I felt about it. Um, and then, secondly, I just felt a responsibility to show people that you can come back and you can be strong and stronger and proud and all those things. I didn't want people to see it and think it was a bad thing. And so I wanted to try and inspire and give hope to people, whether they've been through something, are going through something, or maybe one day would. Like today, we're talking during a pandemic, and it was like I recognized that
Ex-
people always come up and talk to me, but today especially, it felt like I was giving hope to people that were like, "Oh my gosh, we need hope," and it felt like it touched them in a way that was different, just by the nature of what's happening for all of us.
Yeah, it's an awareness that people start having when things like this happen, right? Of the
Yeah.
interconnectedness that everybody has and so forth. You said so many nuggets in those minutes that I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like so many nuggets. The fact one of the things is that you said your loss, quote unquote, and I say the quote
Mhm.
unquote the loss, even when it's
Mhm.
somebody that's passed away in the process of grief
Right.
and so forth, is a visible one,
Right.
so people notice that. But as you said, so many of us carry things that people can't see,
Right.
and that's really the main difference to some extent between this particular type of loss than what's an
Yeah.
emotional type of loss or something that people have lived through, um,
Yeah.
and that we all have something
Yeah.
that we're going through or have lived through, and again, some of us just will never know what others have gone through. So that
Right.
was just whoa. um so thank you for that awareness. And now, what are the first words, and we can wrap it up here, like, or what are the things that you would say to somebody that may be experiencing something like this, in
Mhm.
a type of loss in this moment in their life? Of course, I know that after listening to this, you've already given so many glimpses of hope of what it is that can happen, and that we are really prepared to be able to handle what we're given.
Right.
Um, we just have to dig deep and deep and deep and be patient. I think the patience was the quality that also came up to my mind when you were
Yeah.
talking about that you just wanted to sprint. So
Yeah.
I think God really, really wanted patience to be one of those virtues
Yep.
you learned in this time period.
I know. I laugh because people now tell me I'm like one of the most patient people they've ever met, and I just can't help but laugh. I'm like, I had the reputation of having the least patience of anyone ever, and so it's hilarious when I get
Yeah,
that.
well, well, you were
Like it was by
well, that
force,
it is. You were
basically.
saying, "I wanted to sprint, I wanted to go." By
Yeah.
force, yeah. You were gonna learn it whether,
Yep.
one way or another. I feel that way even with parenting, being a mom, every day I'm faced with
Oh, I
that,
bet.
and that's the skill I keep
Uh-huh.
on having to learn is patience. So that when you were saying, I just wanted to sprint and get it done and do it and and
Yeah.
no, God needed me to wait. So I'm like, oh, patience. That's the virtue she was,
Uh-huh.
sent to learn. So
Oh,
what
yeah.
are some of the things that you may say then to somebody when they're in the middle of that storm? What
Mhm.
would you say to somebody that's
For
going
one,
through?
if it's at all medical related, I would say to advocate for yourself and make your own choices. And that's so unique, right? It's to honor what is best and right for you, for the people in that situation. Because I think we're set up, for example, when I went through everything, it was very like I was being given grim information at all times, like basically your future's grim, type of a thing. And even just the nature of like the amount of medications that they wanted to put me on, and I made my own choices with that, for some of the reasons that I shared with you. And you ideally, which it's so hard during trauma, obviously, um, you could be passive or you could be more proactive. And I would just say to encourage people to try to be as proactive and to retain their own control to the extent that they're able, so that you can really write your own story in whatever way, whatever that looks like, even if it's just like not really the medical part, but the story that you're telling yourself versus what is maybe being told to you. Like this has a grim outcome or something,
Mhm.
and you can decide that that won't be my story, or that doesn't have to be my story. and really direct, your thoughts and your actions from there, and honor yourself to the best of your ability. And again, just gratitude. And it's like, I want to validate that I know that pain makes it so hard. Like, you almost feel like I am completely BSing myself here, right? Like, to be totally honest,
Mhm.
it was just like, this is ridiculous.
And you have to BS yourself long enough to believe your own BS to
Totally,
some
because
extent, in some
yeah,
point. No.
we have free will. We have full and complete. And sometimes I
Mhm.
think I don't stand on this fact as much as I would like to be honest, because I'm afraid of upsetting people. But you get to decide, and it's on you if you're going to be a victim or a victor, right? And I just felt
Mm.
like the worst thing possible, my own, if I could have written my own worst nightmare, I was living it. And so it was like the only thing that I can control, but it's the most powerful thing I can control, is my attitude and my perspective. Because it was like, what I'm not going to do is lose my feet and also lose my light and become bitter and whatever else. I was like, I'm going to be grateful. I'm going to have more light. I'm going to be gracious. I'm going to be kind, kinder, more gracious, those things. And so I really want to encourage people to own that. And also, I want to preface that with, I also understand how pain will lie to you, and it will also it'll make you want to shrink and stuff, and it will tell you have a right to feel sorry for yourself. Pain does. And so you kind of have to, it's like you have to swim upstream through this process while also honoring it, while also sitting with the pain and giving it permission, but not allowing it to then drive the car. Like, stay in the driver's seat and kind of go on a road trip with it, but do not get in the passenger seat. Don't become passive in this experience, because you'll end up
Ooh.
where you don't want to end up.
Ooh. Love, 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 love everything you said. It is exactly how I believe in the process of grief and gratitude, and all those grays in between. You just touched on all that, and the aspect of pain, and even just living with grief in our life, just not living in the grief.
Yeah.
But you can live with grief in your life, but still moving forward rather than letting it consume you. And the
Yeah.
same goes with pain and any other thing in
Mhm.
our life. And you just basically put it with a bow on it, with a cherry on top, everything, all these nuggets at the end. And I'm just so grateful that you were on this podcast here, sharing all these beautiful nuggets to the rest of the listeners, whoever listens, all the world, hopefully the world, and whoever shares with anybody else,
Thank you
and
so much.
uh,
Yes, the world.
the world. And then, as well as just so grateful to have you in my life. So thank you again, Sarah, for taking the time to share your grief and your gratitude as well. Love
Oh,
you, my
thank you
dear.
so
Thanks
much.
again.
I love you too, and you have so much to offer the world, with your own journey and this gift. So it made my heart so happy to know that you were doing this podcast. And I was extremely honored when you asked me, and I just love and appreciate you so much. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so glad we made it happen.
Me
Love
too.
you.
Love
Thanks
you.
again.
You're welcome.
Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, if you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.